Valith 9 had existed for 12 billion years. In all that time, they had never known what it meant to end. The Aethery did not die. They simply were, like stars, like gravity, like the cold mathematics of the universe itself. Their bodies were not flesh, but crystalline vessels that housed pure energy. And their minds had watched empires rise and crumble into dust, while they remained unchanged dot from the bridge of the ancient warship Eternal Calculation. Valith observed the gathered species of the Galactic Council. There were the Vorn, massive creatures of stone and metal. There were the Silith, who communicated through colors that rippled across their translucent skin. There were dozens of others, each one representing civilizations that had existed for millions of years. And there were the humans. Valith had studied them before. A young species. Primitive by galactic standards. They had only discovered faster than light travel 400 years ago, which was barely a blinking cosmic time. Their bodies were soft and fragile. They lived for perhaps 80 years, if they were lucky. They were, by every measure, the Aethery used. Insignificant. Yet here they stood among the ancient ones, and they did not seem to notice how small they were. The reason for this gathering was simple. The Hollow had come. Valith had seen many threats in their long existence. Stellar plagues that consumed entire systems. Machine intelligences that spread like viruses across the stars. Wars that burned for 10,000 years. But the Hollow was different. The Hollow was darkness itself given hunger. It moved between galaxies like a shadow, and everything it touched simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not transformed, just gone. For the first time in 12 billion years, the Aethery had run their calculations and found an answer they did not like. If the Hollow continued unchecked, their species would cease to exist within 3 centuries. 3 centuries was nothing to an immortal. It was tomorrow. It was now. The council chamber was filled with fear. Valith could taste it in the energy patterns of every species present. The Vorn delegation was already discussing evacuation routes to distant galaxies. The Silith had turned gray with despair. Even the ancient Kethrani, who had witnessed the birth of stars, spoke of surrender and acceptance. Then the human delegation arrived. Their leader was a woman named Tanaka Ray. She was old by human standards, perhaps 60 years. Her hair was gray, and her face was marked with lines that Valith knew humans called wrinkles. These were signs of decay, of a body slowly failing. To the Aethery, she should have seemed pitiful. She did not seem pitiful. Admiral Tanaka walked to the center of the chamber as if she belonged there, as if she had as much right to speak as beings who had existed since before her species had learned to walk upright. She looked at the gathered representatives of 100 civilizations, and she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had already made peace with something terrible. "I have listened to your proposals," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "You speak of retreat, of finding new galaxies to hide in, of waiting and hoping the Hollow will pass you by." She shook her head slowly. "My species has a saying. Those who run from wolves become food for wolves." The Vorn ambassador made a sound of contempt. "Your species is 400 years old. What could you possibly know about facing a threat like the Hollow?" Admiral Tanaka turned to look at him. "We know what it means to fight when fighting seems hopeless. We have been doing it since we first stood up on 2 legs on a world that wanted to kill us. We fought predators with sticks and stones. We fought plagues with nothing but determination. We fought each other, again and again, and somehow we survived it all." She paused. "We are very good at refusing to die." Valith found themselves leaning forward, curious in a way they had not been curious in millennia. "The Hollow can be hurt," Admiral Tanaka continued. "Our scientists have analyzed the data from the fallen systems. It is not invincible. It can be pushed back, It can be wounded, but only if we stand and fight. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate. Humanity will not run. We will take our fleet to the front lines. We will hold the darkness back for as long as we can. And maybe, just maybe, we will show you something you have forgotten. The Silith ambassador flickered with confused colors. What could we have forgotten? We have existed for longer than your sun has burned. Admiral Tanaka's smile grew sad. You have forgotten what it means to have something worth dying for. The chamber fell silent. The Lith processed her words carefully. They did not make logical sense. The E3 valued existence above all else. To die was to lose everything. How could death ever be worthwhile? How could ending be preferable to continuing? And yet, looking at this fragile human woman, Valith felt something they could not name. A stirring. A question that had no answer in their vast memory. The council meeting ended without resolution. The ancient species continued their debates about retreat and survival. The humans returned to their ships. 3 days later, the Lith-9 received orders from the E3 Collective. They were to join the human fleet as an observer. Their mission was to document what happened when the humans encountered the Hollow. The Collective expected this to be a short mission. They expected to catalog the extinction of a young and foolish species. Valith transferred their consciousness to a smaller crystalline vessel and boarded the UNSC Defiant Hope, Admiral Tanaka's flagship. The ship was crude by E3 standards. Metal and wire and flickering computer screens. It smelled of recycled air and human sweat and something else. Something Valith would later learn was called coffee. Admiral Tanaka met them personally at the docking bay. "Welcome aboard," she said. "I know why you are here. Your people think we are going to die, and they want to study how it happens." Valith did not deny it. Lying was inefficient. Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly. "That is fine. Watch closely. I hope you learn something." She turned and began walking toward the bridge, then stopped and looked back. "Tell me, observer, in 12 billion years of existence, have you ever been afraid?" Valith considered the question. Fear was an emotion designed to protect mortal creatures from threats to their survival. The E3 had no need for such primitive responses. "No," they answered. "We have never experienced fear." Admiral Tanaka's eyes held something Valith could not read. "Then I pity you," she said softly, "because fear is how you know you are truly alive." She walked away, and Valith was left alone with a strange sensation. It was not quite discomfort. It was not quite interest. It was something in between, something new, and it would not leave them alone. The fleet launched 3 hours later, heading toward the darkness at the edge of known space. Valith stood on the bridge, among humans who laughed and worried and checked their equipment and called their families to say goodbye. They were surrounded by creatures who would be dead within a century, no matter what happened, and for reasons they could not explain, Valith found themselves hoping these strange, brief, impossible beings would survive. 3 weeks into the campaign, the Lilith-9 had filled 17 data crystals with observations about human behavior. None of it made sense. The E3 understood war as mathematics. You calculated your resources. You calculated your enemy's resources. You determined acceptable loss ratios and optimal retreat points. When the numbers turned against you, you withdrew, preserved what you could, and waited for a better opportunity. This was logical. This was how immortal beings approached conflict. Humans did not think this way. Valith watched a pilot named Chun fly her damaged fighter directly into a hollow tendril. Her ship was already dying, leaking atmosphere and fuel, its weapons depleted. By any reasonable calculation, she should have ejected and waited for rescue. Instead, She accelerated into the heart of the enemy formation and detonated her reactor core. The explosion bought 30 seconds. 30 seconds for 3 civilian transport ships to reach the jump point and escape to safety. Chun had traded her entire existence for 30 seconds. Valith ran the numbers again and again. 300 lives saved. 1 life lost. By pure mathematics, it was an acceptable trade. But that was not why Chun had done it. Valith had accessed her final transmission. She had been crying. She had been terrified. And she had done it anyway. This was madness. Beautiful, incomprehensible madness. The humans had a word for it. They called it sacrifice. In the engineering bay. Valith found more madness. Chief Engineer Okonkwo and his team worked 90-hour shifts repairing battle damage, often with their bare hands when the machines failed. The radiation levels in some sections were lethal. Valith calculated that prolonged exposure would reduce their lifespans by 15 to 20 years. They knew this. They worked anyway. Someone has to keep the lights on, Okonkwo told Valith when asked about it. He was smiling despite the exhaustion carved into his face. If we do not fix the shields, everyone dies. If we fix the shields, maybe just a few of us die a little earlier than planned. Easy choice. But you will die regardless, Valith said. In 80 years or in 60 years, you will cease to exist. Why does it matter how you spend those years? Okonkwo laughed. It was a warm sound, full of something Valith could not identify. Because those years are all I have got. Might as well use them for something that matters. Valith did not understand, but they added the conversation to their records. Admiral Tanaka was perhaps the strangest of all. She slept only 4 hours each night, and even those hours were often interrupted by emergency calls and tactical decisions. Her body was clearly failing under the strain. Valith calculated that she was reducing her remaining lifespan by months for every week they spent in combat. When Valith pointed this out, Tanaka simply shrugged. I can sleep when I am dead, she said. It was apparently a human joke, though Valith did not understand what was funny about it. But the thing that fascinated Valith most was the list. Tanaka kept a file in her personal computer. It contained names. Over 2,000 names. Every crew member who had died under her command since the campaign began. She reviewed this list every night before her 4 hours of sleep. She spoke the names aloud, one by one, as if performing some kind of ritual. Why do you do this? Valith asked one night, watching from the corner of her quarters. They are dead. They cannot hear you. This serves no tactical purpose. Tanaka looked at them with those strange, tired, ancient eyes. I do it because someone should remember them. Their families are far away. Their friends are fighting for their lives. If I do not speak their names, who will? But memory is finite. You cannot carry all of them. No, Tanaka agreed. But I can try. And trying matters even when you fail. Valith added this to their records as well, though they still did not understand. One evening, Valith encountered a human sergeant named Martinez in the observation deck. He was sitting alone, staring out at the stars. The hollow was visible in the distance, a patch of darkness where no stars shone, slowly growing larger as the fleet advanced toward it. You are the observer, Martinez said without turning around. The immortal one. Yes, must be nice. Martinez's voice was flat. Living forever. Never having to worry about any of this. Valith considered the statement. It is not nice or not nice. It simply is. We exist. We observe. We continue. Martinez turned to look at them. He was young by human standards, perhaps 25 years old. But his eyes seemed older. Do you know what I was doing before I joined the Navy? I was a teacher. Elementary school. Little kids, 6 and 7 years old. I taught them how to read. Why did you stop? Because the Hollow came. Because someone had to fight. Martinez looked back at the stars. Those kids are on a refugee ship somewhere now, running away to a new galaxy. Maybe they will make it. Maybe they will grow up and have kids of their own and never even remember my name. And that is fine. That is the point. Valith moved closer to the window. I do not understand. You gave up your purpose, your students, your future, for people who will forget you existed. No, Martinez smiled, and it was a sad smile. I gave it up so they could have a future at all. That is the difference between us, observer. You have forever. You can wait for problems to solve themselves. We have maybe 80 years if we are lucky. That is not a lot of time to matter. So when we get the chance to matter, really matter, we take it. Even if it kills you? Especially if it kills us. Because then we know it was real. We know we spent our little moment of existence on something bigger than ourselves. Valith stood in silence for a long time after Martinez left. The darkness of the Hollow grew larger on the view screen, swallowing more stars with each passing hour. And somewhere deep in their crystalline consciousness, something was changing. They found themselves checking the casualty lists each day. Not for data, not for observation, but because they wanted to know if the humans they had spoken to were still alive. They found themselves hoping that Chun's sacrifice had meant something, that Okonkwo's hands would hold steady for one more repair, that Martinez would survive to see if his students made it to safety. This was inefficient. This was illogical. This was not how an Ethery was supposed to think, but Valith could not stop. The fleet reached the first major Hollow incursion point 3 days later. Valith watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Defiant Hope, surrounded by humans who screamed orders and prayed to gods and cried when their friends died on distant ships. And for the first time in 12 billion years, Valith found themselves invested in an outcome. They wanted these strange, brief, impossible creatures to win. They did not know what to call this feeling. It was uncomfortable. It was distracting. It was entirely unlike anything they had experienced before, but they could not make it stop. The siege of Meridian Station lasted 11 days. Valith 9 would remember every moment of it for the rest of their existence, which could be forever. They would remember the screaming alarms and the burning corridors and the faces of humans who knew they were going to die and kept fighting anyway. They would remember the exact moment when something inside them broke, and they became something new. Meridian Station was a mining colony on the edge of nowhere. It housed 80,000 civilians, mostly families of miners who worked the asteroid fields. It was not strategically important. It produced no vital resources. By pure military logic, it should have been abandoned the moment the Hollow appeared on the horizon. Admiral Tanaka ordered the fleet to hold. "We do not abandon civilians," she said when her officers questioned the decision. "Not ever. Not for any reason. Admiral, the Hollow will overwhelm our defenses within days. We cannot win this fight. Then we will lose it slowly. Every hour we hold is another hour for evacuation ships to arrive. Every day we buy is another day for those families to escape." Tanaka's voice was iron. "We hold until we cannot hold anymore. Is that clear?" It was clear that the battle began on a Tuesday by human calendars. Valith did not know why humans named their days, but they found the practice strangely comforting. Tuesdays were for battles. Wednesdays were for repairs. Thursdays were for counting the dead. By Friday, the outer defense ring had fallen. By Sunday, the Hollow had penetrated the station's lower levels. By Monday, everyone knew they were going to die. And still they fought. Valith spent most of the siege on the command deck, observing. But on the 8th day, they found themselves drawn to the communications center. It was a small room filled with screens and equipment and a single human operator. Her name was Ensign Park. She was 20 years old. Park was responsible for coordinating evacuation shuttles. She tracked their positions, guided them through the chaos of battle, and directed them to safe jump points. It was boring work under normal circumstances. Under siege, it was the difference between life and death for thousands of people. On the 8th day, the hollow corruption began spreading through the station's lower decks. The darkness moved like a disease, consuming everything it touched. People who could not evacuate in time simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but silence. The corruption was rising toward the communication center. Valith watched Park work. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale. She was crying, though she did not seem to notice the tears running down her cheeks. And she did not stop working. Not for a second. Shuttle 7, adjust heading to bearing 335. You are drifting into hostile space. Shuttle 12, you are clear for jump. Get those people out of here. Shuttle 19, I am detecting hull damage on your port side. Can you confirm? The lights flickered. The floor beneath them groaned as the corruption ate through the levels below. Park's console sparked and died, then came back online. She kept working. Why do you not leave? Valith asked. The evacuation routes are still open. You could escape. Park did not look up from her screens. Because if I leave, no one is guiding these shuttles. If no one is guiding these shuttles, people die. You will die if you stay. I know. Her voice cracked, but her hands stayed steady on the controls. Shuttle 23, you are approaching the jump point. Safe travels. Valith did not understand. They ran the calculations. Park could save herself. Someone else could take over communications. The loss of one operator would not significantly impact evacuation efficiency. There was no logical reason for her to stay, but she stayed. The corruption reached the floor below them. Valith could feel it, a wrongness in the energy patterns of the station. The lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in Red Dot Park kept working. Shuttle 24, please respond. No answer. Park's voice wavered. Shuttle 24, this is Meridian Command, please respond. Silence. Park closed her eyes for 1 second, 2 seconds, then opened them again. Shuttle 25, you are next in queue. Proceed to jump point Alpha. The floor began to dissolve. Valith watched the darkness creep up through the metal, consuming everything it touched. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a star die. They had seen many stars die over 12 billion years. They had never felt anything about it. They felt something now. Park looked at the approaching darkness. She looked at Valith. She smiled, and it was the saddest smile Valith had ever seen. Tell them I stayed at my post, she said. Tell them I did my job until the end. I will tell them. Park turned back to her console. The darkness rose around her ankles, her knees, her waist. She kept working. Her voice never stopped. Shuttle 26, you are clear for jump. Shuttle 27, adjust heading. Shuttle 28. And then she was gone. Valith stood alone in the communication center, surrounded by silence and darkness. The corruption could not harm them. Their crystalline body was immune to its touch. But they stood there anyway, frozen in place by something they had no name for. Something was wrong inside them. Something had broken. They felt a tightness in their consciousness, a weight that had never existed before. They wanted to undo what had happened. They wanted Park to still be alive, guiding her shuttles, crying and shaking and doing her job anyway. They wanted this specific human, this brief and fragile creature who had existed for only 20 years, to exist for 20 more. But she was gone. and she would never come back. Valith understood, in that moment, what the Aethery had never understood in 12 billion years of existence. They understood why humans named their days. They understood why Tanaka read her list of names every night. They understood why Martinez had given up teaching children to fight a war he might not survive. They understood grief. The station was evacuated 12 hours later. 62,000 of the 80,000 civilians made it to safety. The fleet withdrew, battered and bleeding but alive. The Hollow consumed Meridian Station and moved on, hungry for more. Valith helped process the casualty reports. They had never helped with anything before. They were observers, not participants. But they could not simply watch anymore. They needed to do something, anything, to push back against the darkness. Admiral Tanaka found them in the records room late that night. "You look different," she said. Valith did not know how to respond. "I do not look like anything. I am a crystalline matrix housing an energy pattern." "That is not what I meant." Tanaka sat down across from them. She looked tired. She always looked tired now. "Something changed in you today. I can see it." Valith was silent for a long moment. "I watched Ensign Park die." She stayed in her post even when the Hollow was consuming her. She kept guiding evacuation shuttles until the moment she ceased to exist. They paused. "I cannot stop thinking about her. I cannot stop wishing she had survived. This feeling will not go away." Tanaka nodded slowly. "That is called grief. It is what you feel when someone you care about dies. I did not know I cared about her. I did not know I could care about anyone. It hurts, does it not?" Tanaka's voice was soft. "Caring about people who can die." Valith could not answer. The weight inside them was too heavy. The tightness was too strong. For the first time in 12 billion years, they had something they could lose, and they had lost it. "Why do you do it?" they finally asked. "Why do you care about each other when you know it will end in pain? Why do you form bonds when those bonds will be broken? It seems like cruelty. It seems like torture." Tanaka smiled, and it was the same sad smile that Park had worn in her final moments. "Because the pain is worth it. Because loving someone, even briefly, is better than feeling nothing forever." She stood up and put her hand on Valith's crystalline surface. It was warm. "Welcome to being alive, observer. It hurts, but it is worth it." She left Valith alone with their grief and their questions and the terrible, wonderful weight of caring about something that could be lost. The fleet gathered in the shadow of a dead star. Valith stood on the observation deck of the Defiant Hope and watched the ships assemble. There were hundreds of them now, gathered from every human colony, every allied species that had chosen to fight instead of run. They were battered and scarred and running low on everything, but they were here. Tomorrow, they would attack the Hollow's central mass. Tomorrow, the war would be won or lost. Tomorrow, many of them would die. Valith had petitioned the Aethery Collective to join the battle. Not as an observer, as a fighter. They had spent 3 days composing the request, carefully explaining what they had learned, what they had felt, why this mattered. They had argued that the Aethery could not simply watch anymore. They had argued that observation without action was cowardice. The collective had denied their request. The response had arrived an hour ago, transmitted across the vast distances of space in the cold, mathematical language of the Aethery. "Your observations have been valuable. Your emotional corruption is noted and will be addressed upon your return. You are to observe the battle only. Aethery survival is too valuable to risk. This is final. Emotional corruption. As if caring about other beings was a disease. As if grief and love and fear were malfunctions to be repaired. For the first time in 12 billion years, Velith felt something like anger toward their own kind. The observation deck was empty except for one human. Sergeant Martinez sat in his usual spot by the window, staring out at the gathered fleet. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. The war had aged him. It had aged everyone. Cannot sleep either? Martinez asked without turning around. I do not sleep. Right, immortal. Martinez smiled faintly. Must be nice sometimes. Never getting tired. Never wearing out. Velith moved to stand beside him. It is not nice. It is simply existence. Though I am beginning to wonder if existence without purpose is truly living at all. Martinez turned to look at them. That is a very human thing to say, perhaps. Velith was silent for a moment. I petitioned my people to let me fight tomorrow. They refused. They say I am corrupted. They want to fix me when I return. Are you going to let them? The question hung in the air between them. Velith had not considered it before. The collective was the source of all ethery identity. To defy them was to become something else entirely. Something new. Something alone. I do not know, Velith said finally. What would you do? Martinez laughed softly. I would tell them to go to hell. But I'm just a dead man walking. My opinion probably does not count for much. You are not dead. Not yet. Martinez looked back at the stars. But we both know how tomorrow is going to go. The hollow is bigger than anything we have ever fought. Half of us are not going to make it home. Maybe none of us will. And yet you are going anyway. Of course I am. Martinez's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. This is what I signed up for. This is why I gave up teaching. Not because I wanted to die, but because some things are worth dying for. What things? Martinez was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. Do you know what scares me most? It is not dying. Dying is easy. You just stop, and everything stops with you. No more pain, no more fear, no more anything. He shook his head. What scares me is dying, and having it mean nothing. Dying and nothing changing. Dying and the universe just moving on like I was never here. Velith considered this. And if your death tomorrow changes nothing, if the hollow consumes everything regardless of what you do? Martinez turned to face them fully. His eyes were bright, intense. Then I still chose to stand. I still chose to fight. That is mine. Nobody can take that from me. He paused. Do you understand? It is not about winning. It is about choosing. It is about deciding that some things matter more than your own survival. Velith understood. For the first time, truly, completely, they understood. The ethery had existed for 12 billion years by avoiding risk, by calculating odds, by choosing survival over everything else. They had persisted, and they had called that living. But persistence was not life. Calculation was not meaning. Safety was not purpose. The humans were going to die tomorrow. All of them, eventually, whether in battle or in the slow decay of old age. They had maybe 80 years of existence, and those years would end in darkness and silence and nothing. And yet they were braver than the ethery had ever been, because courage was not the absence of death. Courage was choosing something greater than yourself, despite knowing you would die. It was standing up when sitting down was safer. It was fighting when running was smarter. It was loving when losing hurt so badly you could barely breathe. The humans were not brave despite their mortality. They were brave because of it. I understand, Velith said. I finally understand. Martinez smiled. Good. Then maybe you can explain it to your people someday. Maybe they will listen. Perhaps. Velith looked out at the gathered fleet, at the ships full of creatures who were about to risk everything for each other. Or perhaps I will show them instead. The night passed slowly. Valith moved through the ship, observing the humans as they prepared for battle. Some of them prayed. Some of them wrote letters to families they might never see again. Some of them laughed and joked and refused to acknowledge the darkness waiting for them. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge, reviewing battle plans for the 100th time. She had not slept in 3 days. Her body was failing under the strain, running on nothing but will and duty and love for the people under her command. "Observer," she said when she noticed Valith watching, "you should not be here. The battle zone will be dangerous, even for an immortal." "I am aware." Valith moved to stand beside her. "I have decided to stay anyway." Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "I thought your people ordered you to observe only." "They did." "And you are going to disobey them?" Valith considered the question. 12 billion years of obedience weighed against 3 months of learning what it meant to truly live. It was not a difficult choice anymore. "Yes," they said. "I am going to disobey them." Tanaka smiled. It was the first real smile Valith had seen from her in weeks. "Why?" "Because you taught me something. You and your people. You taught me that existence without purpose is empty. That safety without meaning is pointless. That watching without acting is cowardice." Valith turned to face the view screen, where the hollow waited like a wound in the fabric of space. "Tomorrow, I am going to fight beside you. Not because I think we will win, but because some things matter more than survival." "That is very human of you," Tanaka said softly. "I will take that as a compliment." The hours passed. The fleet made its final preparations. And when dawn came, as measured by the ship's artificial day cycle, Valith 9 took their place among the human formation. They were going to war. They were probably going to die. And for the first time in 12 billion years, they were ready to face whatever came next. The Battle of the Hollow's Heart began at 0600 hours. Ship time. Valith 9 watched the fleet surge forward into the darkness. Hundreds of ships flying in perfect formation toward the heart of the enemy. The hollow rose before them like a wall of nothing, a place where stars should exist but did not. It was beautiful and terrible and hungry, always hungry. The humans did not hesitate. Admiral Tanaka's voice crackled across the fleet communication channel. "All ships, all hands. This is what we trained for. This is what we came here to do. Today, we show the universe that humanity does not run. Today, we fight for everyone who cannot fight for themselves. For the colonies behind us. For the children who deserve a future. For every species that chose to stand with us instead of flee." She paused. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I am proud to serve with every single one of you. Now let us give them hell." The fleet roared forward into battle. Valith had never experienced combat before. They had observed many wars from safe distances, cataloging strategies and casualties with cold precision. But this was different. This was chaos and fire and screaming and death, all happening at once, all around them. Ships exploded. Pilots screamed. The hollow lashed out with tendrils of pure darkness, consuming everything they touched. Within the first hour, 30 ships were gone. Within the second hour, the number had doubled, and still the humans fought. Valith piloted their crystalline vessel through the chaos, lending their ancient knowledge to the human formations. They calculated firing solutions and predicted enemy movements and transmitted tactical data to ships in danger. For the first time in their existence, they were not observing. They were participating. It felt like nothing they had ever experienced. It felt like being alive. The battle raged for hours. The hollow was pushed back, then surged forward again. Ships fell like leaves in a storm. The humans adapted, reformed, kept fighting. They were losing, but they were losing slowly. And every moment they held was another moment for distant colonies to evacuate. Then, the tide turned. Admiral Tanaka's flagship. The Defiant Hope broke through the outer shell of the hollow. For a brief, shining moment, the path to the enemy's core was open. Sensors showed the heart of the darkness, a point of absolute nothing that served as the center of the hollow's existence. If it could be destroyed, the entire entity might collapse, but the Defiant Hope was damaged. Its weapons were depleted. Its engines were failing. It still had one weapon left, its reactor. If the ship detonated at the heart of the hollow, the explosion might be enough to destroy the core. But someone would have to fly it there. Someone would have to stay. Admiral Tanaka's voice came over the communication channel, calm and steady as always. All hands, abandon ship. Repeat, all hands, abandon ship. This is not a drill. Get to the escape pods and get out of here. The crew began to evacuate. Valeth watched the pods launch, carrying humans to safety. Within minutes, the bridge was nearly empty. Only Tanaka remained at the helm, steering the dying ship toward the heart of darkness. And Valeth, observer. Tanaka turned to look at them. You should be on one of those pods. I know. You are immortal. You do not have to do this. Valeth moved to stand beside her at the helm. The hollow's core grew larger on the view screen, a point of absolute nothing that swallowed all light and hope and life. They had 12 billion years of existence behind them. They could have 12 billion more, but some things mattered more than survival. I know, Valeth said. That is why I am choosing to stay. For the first time in my existence, I am choosing something that matters more than my own continuation. Tanaka's eyes filled with tears. That is called being human. No. Valeth's crystalline form hummed with something warm and bright and terrifying. I believe it is called being alive. The ship plunged deeper into the darkness. Alarm screamed. The hull groaned and twisted as the hollow tried to consume them. Tanaka's hands stayed steady on the controls, guiding them toward the core. I always wondered what it would feel like, she said quietly. At the end, what does it feel like? Tanaka smiled. It was the most peaceful expression Valeth had ever seen on her face. It feels right. It feels like everything I have done, everything I have been, was leading to this moment. She looked at Valeth. Thank you for staying. I did not want to do this alone. You taught me what it means to live. I could not let you die alone. The core was close now. So close. The darkness pressed against the ship from all sides, hungry and eternal and empty. Valeth felt something they had never felt before, a cold weight in their consciousness, a desperate desire to flee, to survive, to continue existing. Fear. They were afraid. For the first time in 12 billion years, they understood what it meant to fear. And they stayed anyway. Admiral Tanaka. Valeth's voice was steady despite the fear. It has been an honor. The honor was mine, observer. Tanaka's hand reached out and touched Valeth's crystalline surface one last time. Now let us show them how it is done. She pressed the button that began the reactor overload sequence. The explosion was beautiful. It was light and fire and fury, a sun being born in the heart of darkness. The hollow's core shattered. The darkness screamed, a sound that echoed across every frequency, and began to collapse inward. Valeth's consciousness scattered across fragments of crystal, blown apart by the force of the blast. For a long, terrible moment, they experienced something like death, disconnection, silence, the end of everything they were. Then, slowly, they began to reform. The human fleet spent weeks collecting the fragments of their crystalline body, drifting through the debris field where the hollow had once existed. When they finally pieced Valeth back together, the observer was changed, smaller, dimmer, less than they had been, but also more. 3 months later, Valeth 9 stood before the Ethery Collective. They had been summoned to explain their corruption, their disobedience, Their impossible choice to fight and die alongside mortal creatures. The collective waited in cold, eternal silence. You asked me to document what I witnessed among the humans, Valeth began. Their voice was different now, warmer, more alive. I will tell you what I saw. I witnessed beings who knew they would die, who felt fear and suffered loss and had every reason to flee, choose instead to stand and fight. Not because they calculated victory was probable, but because the act of standing meant something to them. The collective did not respond. They rarely did. You'd call us immortal, Valeth continued. But I learned something in that battle. We are not truly alive. We have merely persisted. Existence without purpose is not life. Continuation without meaning is not living. We have spent 12 billion years watching the universe go by, and we have never once chosen to be part of it. Still silence. The humans taught me what it means to live, to fear, to hope, to sacrifice, to love something more than your own continuation. Valeth paused. I experienced fear for the first time battling alongside mortals, and I am grateful. I am grateful. One of the collective finally spoke. Grateful? For corruption? For weakness? No. Valeth's crystalline form glowed with something bright and fierce. Grateful for finally understanding the truth. Fear is not weakness. Fear is what you feel when you finally have something worth losing. The collective deliberated for a long time. In the end, they offered Valeth a choice: undergo repair to remove the emotional corruption, or leave the collective forever. Valeth chose to leave. They returned to human space a year later, to a small colony on the edge of the galaxy. They became a teacher there, helping young humans understand the universe and their place in it. They told stories about Admiral Tanaka and Sergeant Martinez and Ensign Park, about humans who had lived briefly and burned brightly and changed the course of history. They told stories about what it meant to be alive. And every night, before the artificial stars came out, they read a list of names. Over 2,000 names, spoken aloud one by one, so that someone would remember. So that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. VLITH-9 had existed for 12 billion years. They had watched empires rise and fall, stars be born and die, civilizations spread across the galaxy and crumble into dust. They had seen everything the universe had to offer, but they had never truly lived until they learned to fear, until they learned to love, until they learned to stand alongside mortals and fight for something greater than themselves. That was the gift humanity had given them. Not immortality, not power, not knowledge. Purpose. And that was worth more than forever.